Hello, Canucks fans. Welcome back to another episode of Canucks Conversation brought to you by Bet365. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Be sure to use code NATION when you sign up for an account. It is a seller's market in the NHL. We've learned that over this weekend, and we're going to talk about that and how it impacts the Vancouver Canucks. My name is David Quadrelli. I am joined by Harman Dial, and this is Canucks Conversation. And I'm very excited for just the week ahead. Like trade deadline week, you always feel it. The tension is starting to ramp up. You're starting to feel different about everything. You just look at it and say something's going to happen here. We don't know what it's going to be. That's the beauty of the trade deadline. You never really know what's going to happen. Question of the day, and Harmon, you don't need to answer right away. Think about it, and I want the people to answer it as well. The biggest surprise deadline move the Canucks have made in the past 5 years. Not of all time, past 5 years, a move that happened at the deadline that just caught you off guard and you were like, oh, okay, I was not expecting to see that. The one to beat, Luke Schenn for a third-round pick. I remember we were very surprised when we did the show. We were like, oh, they traded a pending UFA in Luke Schenn. They actually did it. That one surprised us, a third-round pick for Luke Schenn. But you can think about it if you need to.
I don't think that was that big of a surprise. I mean, if you're counting close to the deadline, Hronek would take it by a mile.
There you go. Well, that's not a deadline trade. That's my point. That's not a deadline trade.
Well, what are the parameters within the week?
Has to happen,
on the day
no,
of?
Has to happen. Well, I was going to say day of. Yeah, it has to happen day of. That's a deadline deal to me.
Now I have to go back and remember what deals actually happened on deadline.
So take your time.
I think you can give it 48 hours within the deadline. That's when it actually like trade deadline.
Sure. So think about it. How was your weekend?
It was good. I'm not going to lie. If I'm a Canucks fan, I'm a little bit nervous for the week ahead.
And why is that?
Just hearing all the reporting, a lot of the national insiders seeming to insinuate that making the playoffs is still a really big priority for this team. The idea that the Canucks are still open to the idea of potentially using Boeser of keeping Boeser as their own rental, even though they are reportedly listening to offers. It makes me nervous. We know this ownership group has always prioritized that playoff revenue. I'm just a little nervous that they may be a little bit shorthanded, and not that I expect them to do anything reckless that we look at and say, "Oh my God, why are they trading for this rental?" And this is crazy. I don't expect them to do anything like that. But I guess you could say the risk of letting Boeser walk for nothing would be reckless. I'll give that. That's the primary concern. That still lingers in my mind a little bit, and then also what forward are they potentially targeting? That seems to be the talking point around the Canucks right now. Is it seems like they're kind of chasing a forward, and there's a difference, right? Because if you're of the mindset as an organization that it's all about building and icing the best possible team for next season, then you're patient. You're a little less desperate about making a trade prior to the deadline. But if you're of this mindset that we got to make the playoffs at all costs, then your positioning is a little bit more desperate ahead of the deadline. So I'd be a little bit nervous if I was a Canucks fan, not predicting that anything negative or bad is going to happen. But it's going to be interesting to see what they actually do.
I am predicting that something negative and bad is going to happen. I'll go out and do it. And I was trying to be calmer today. Matteo Massaro in the chat said Quads was going off last episode. Do you think it'll be a more calm episode today? It was going to be, and I'm going to try to be calm, because here's the thing. I said my piece on the last episode. If you haven't listened to it, I laid it all out about Brock Boeser. I actually wrote it today because this own rental idea is going around again, and we're going to talk about it more than anyone else. I don't want to say all of everything I have to say on the matter right now. But yeah, this idea of keeping Brock Boeser as your own rental is starting to go around a little bit more. And as you said, when you start to hear the national insiders talking about it a little bit more, it becomes a bit concerning. But as I said on Friday, I think there's a way for this team to ship out Brock Boeser and remain competitive, or whatever they are right now. I mean, they were competitive against Seattle.
He has 3 points in 10 games since JT was traded.
Mm-hmm.
Is he single-handedly making or breaking whether you make the playoffs? Of course he helps.
He's a -8 too. I know plus minus is flawed, but -8.
Yeah, like the
10
point
games.
is he hasn't been the typical, like, are you going to get the 30 goal version of Boeser down the stretch, considering you don't have the ideal centerman for him to play with? And if anything, that just should amplify your belief as an organization that he's not going to single-handedly make or break your playoff odds, and that it should be one or the other, a reasonable extension or a trade.
Okay, I want to talk. Let's save the Boeser stuff. I want
Yeah.
to save it for anyone else. Let's warm up here. Let's get warm. Canucks fall 5-3 to the Seattle Kraken. Harmon, what did you want to talk about from this game?
I think they got a sixth because of the empty netter.
6-3 with the empty netter.
Oh, thank you.
It was interesting because for once it felt like the Canucks were actually generating a high volume of chances, and I actually feel for them to a certain extent because they control play, and for once it was all right. They're actually manufacturing chances, especially in that first period. They were stacking shifts one on top of the other in the offensive zone. Ultimately, though, process doesn't matter right now. There's no margin for error. You need every point you can, and to me, I'm usually a process-oriented guy. I'm the first one to come on a show and try and take a level-headed approach where if the Canucks outplay a team and they don't get the result, I'm typically the first to sort of be like, hey, you know what? They didn't get the result, but if they sustain that, they're going to win more often than they lose, and vice versa. If they get badly outplayed and they win a game, I'm not going to fixate on the fact that they won the game. I'm going to be a little bit concerned about the process, but it's hard for me to hang my hat on, oh boy, they created a lot of chances against Seattle, because this team's been so inconsistent. I just don't have belief that, okay, they showed signs of life offensively. They hit 3 posts. And when you look at how Seattle manufactured its goals, 3 of them were redirections, which, yeah, on the one hand, the Canucks have a defensive responsibility to tie those guys up, but also 3 redirection goals, that's pretty lucky on Seattle's part. Even the Montour goal in the third period, I didn't love that one for Kevin Lankinen. It's tough for me, given the inconsistent pattern of this team, to try and find the silver lining out of the process in that game offensively.
I think that's a fair way to put it, and it's almost the way we talk about Elias Pettersson, right? Is it's like, okay, enough of this, enough of the, well, this went well, or he stacked a shift here, he did this well. It's almost the same thing with the Canucks is where we're at right now. It's just like, okay, but you need to start winning games. And even in the guise of a playoff run of, okay, if you want to make the playoffs, you need to do more than what we saw against Seattle. You need to be able to take care of business against teams like the Seattle Kraken. At the end of the day, the Canucks didn't do that. I did want to give a quick shout out to Pius Suter, who finally scored 16 goals for the first time in his career. It's been a lot of 15, 14, 14, 14, some 15s in there as well. But Pius Suter breaks the 16 goal mark for the first time in his career.
You also look at the way that that goal was created. I think what you can learn from that game is looking at, okay, how did they create some of those scoring chances, and what elements did they show against Seattle that have otherwise been missing through the rest of the season? And I was at Canucks practice yesterday, and I had a fantastic conversation with Jake DeBrusk. I've got an article coming out tomorrow. One thing we were talking about was, I mean, 2 things. First of all, the forecheck was ferocious, right? You look at the way that Sherwood and Höglander sort of forced Seattle into those turnovers, into the turnover leading to the goal. We haven't seen enough of that this year. And I think back to how last season, yes, the Canucks weren't prolific at racking up slot chances and shots, but one thing they did do was they at least possessed the puck for long stretches in the offensive zone, and it was a nightmare for opponents to try and exit the defensive zone against Canucks forecheck, and that just hasn't been there with enough consistency. Rick Tocchet said the same thing. Forecheck was great against Seattle, but we need to build on that and have that be a strength of our game consistently. They've had too many passengers on that front this year, and part of me wonders, like there are 2 thoughts I have with that. One, I think it's incredibly taxing physically to maintain that, all out playing style over an 82 game season. But number 2, they did it last year. They were so hard to play against from that perspective. The forecheck, the back check, like there's a reason they were so good at controlling play, even though they weren't a prolific offensive team. And that makes me wonder about like the work rate of this group and why has it been so inconsistent this year? And I don't think that's a great reflection on the players. To go back to the conversation with DeBrusque, when they started stacking those shifts, which first of all, how it's been rare for them to, like they did in the first period, get one shift in the offensive zone, hem them in for a second, hem them in for a third. What that does is it forces Seattle to be in a position where they finally get the puck back after being hemmed in. All they can do is chip it out to the neutral zone and go off for a change. Or all they can do is gain the red line and dump it in and go off for a change, which means when the Canucks get the puck back, it's easy for them to come back down Seattle's throat because there's no forecheck for them to have to contest. And that's like DeBrusque was saying, like we haven't had enough of that this year. It's felt like, if anything, we've been on the receiving end of that, on the defensive side of that, way too often this year. And I think that goes back to the forecheck. I don't think the forecheck alone turns them into a prolific offensive team, because they weren't that last year. But when you look at like why have they been 32nd in the NHL for goals scored per game since Jan 1, I think part of it starts with, like, you would get more improvement, you would get more zone time, you would apply more pressure on opponents if your forecheck was actually causing issues for opposing defensemen on breakouts on a more consistent basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you put that really well. And I mean, we've talked about that very subject of getting hemmed in your own zone. And again, making your forwards defend and then chipping the puck out. We talked about that a lot early on this year when it came to the Canucks roster construction, and especially in the defensive end, how the defenseman not being able to move the puck was a serious problem. A lot of conversation about team defense. I want to ask you about that. Like, how do you think the Canucks defended in that game? Because I think it comes down to, like you said, 3 deflection goals. Like, yeah, you want to see them tie up sticks, sure, but that is lucky for Seattle to have 3 deflection goals. And I know you said that, but how did you think of the team defense that game?
It wasn't great. I'd say both things were true, where Seattle's lucky to score as many goals as they did and get some of those bounces, but I also didn't love the way the Canucks defended. Even going back to the Anaheim game, I thought the rush defense was poor in that one. And just the sorts of mistakes you can't make when you're a team that can only really win 2-1 or 3-2 types of games. I think their defensive form just hasn't been, like, they need elite defense to win games. Given how little offense they muster, they're not getting elite defensive play. It's really that simple. And I think part of that extends as well to Quinn Hughes in the 3 games that he was back, looked very restricted. Didn't look close to 100% physical health. Him and Hronek, I thought that D pair struggled in the defensive end. They were on the ice for 3 5-on-5 goals against in that game. And even just look at the numbers for Quinn in the 3 games that he's come back since injury. The Canucks, in his 5-on-5 minutes, have been outshot 25-23. The scoring chances are basically dead even, and the Canucks have been outscored 5-1. That's not typical Quinn Hughes level results. Again, that's not a criticism of Quinn at all. We can clearly tell he's doing everything possible to play through these injuries, but he's just restricted physically. And that has a huge impact on the team, not only offensively, but like Quinn's been impeccable defensively this year, and that has hindered them as well. He's the engine of this team's 2-way results.
Mm-hmm. He wasn't at practice on Sunday. And we're going to talk to Jeff Patterson about that. Let's bring him in. Jeff Patterson is brought to you by our friends over at Pacific Toyota Dealers, who want to tell you about the 100% electric Toyota BZ4X. With plenty of space, the BZ4X is backed by the peace of mind that comes with knowing you're driving a Toyota. When you choose the BZ4X, you can get up to $6,500 in rebates and incentives, and now you can finance a 2025 BZ4X from 3.29% APR for 36 months. Visit shoptoyota.ca or your local Pacific Toyota dealer today, and make sure you check out that contest. It is over on the Instagram and Facebook page at Toyota Pacific. You can enter. It's 2 tickets to the Konica Minolta Champions Club at Rogers Arena for the April 6th game between the Canucks and Golden Knights. Comes with 2 Canucks jerseys as well. Contest is open only to residents of BC and Yukon who are age of majority. Okay, let's bring him in. Jeff Patterson. Jeff, Sunday. No Quinn Hughes. No Thatcher Demko. What can you tell us?
No, neither of those guys, but there was a giant inflatable coffee cup behind one of the Canucks nets. You probably saw the photo in my scenes from practice. There was a Tim Hortons mini minor jamboree going on all weekend. So I posted the picture and people were like, why is there a giant coffee cup behind the net? It's not going to be there when they play Anaheim on Wednesday night. But it was a nice added feature, a little texture to a practice. And look, we're grasping for things that are different around this hockey club these days. Giant inflatable coffee cup was different. Unfortunately, no Quinn Hughes. And yeah, I guess I was hoping that Thatcher Demko was going to be out there as a third goaltender at the very least. We were told that he'd be reevaluated when they got back off the road. Rick Tocchet gave the update that he's been skating on his own a couple of times just to get his skating legs, but I don't know that we're going to see him at practice on Tuesday. I don't know that we're going to see him 10 goal on this homestand. So that's the Thatcher Demko update. Quinn Hughes, this is troubling because this is said to be a new injury, not related to the oblique, although I wonder if it's all sort of tied together at some point for the reasons Harm said, that he just doesn't look like himself right now and trying to do too much is, you can understand. This guy's a competitor. He hates sitting out. He missed the 6 games. He came back, but yeah, we're just not used to seeing him fishing pucks out of his net at the rate that he has. Certainly in the Anaheim game, he was on the ice for 4 of the goals, including an empty netter, and then 3 goals against Seattle before they shut him down for the final 10 minutes. So rare are the nights this year that Quinn Hughes and Filip Hronek together, haven't looked like a top pair, but I don't know if Hronek was trying to compensate for knowing that his partner wasn't at 100%. But Phil Hronek seemed off his game as well. And if those guys aren't going, then the trickle down is that this team isn't likely to have success. So, we don't know what to expect. I guess off day today for the Canucks. We'll see if Quinn is available. But, just my spidey senses are that they may have to move forward here in the short term once again without their captain.
J-Pat, it's been interesting. I think for most of this season, a lot of us, even though the Canucks have never really been secure in that wildcard 2 spot for a while and are now below it. There's been this sort of sense and belief for a lot of us that given that the rest of the field isn't particularly strong, that it sort of felt like you expected a stretch at some point where, okay, they'll put together a little bit of streak and start to reassert themselves in that spot and kind of pull away. It's sort of been an assumption that, okay, the Canucks are the heavy favorites in this race. The longer this goes on, and especially the team struggling out of the Four Nations break, even though the competition for a wildcard 2 spot isn't particularly strong, how worried are you starting to get about that playoff spot?
Sure, 1,000%. Look, it's not just an elephant in the room. It's now a pack of elephants in the room that you go nowhere without your star players. If Quinn Hughes is out of the lineup, that hampers them incredibly, but the existing elephant remains, and that is the guy that we talk about ad nauseum. You were there at practice yesterday, Harm. I mean, Rick Tocchet spoke for 8 minutes to the media, and he didn't once mention Elias Pettersson's name, and yet you could have injected EP40 into just about every answer that Rick Tocchet had. And he's kind of at a point now where he recognizes it, right? And he talked about you can have all the great systems you want, but if your star level players aren't shooting the puck and attacking the net and all those types of things, he had the question about the Four Nations and came right back to this idea that these great players all just take the puck and, get it to the net. And again, didn't mention Pettersson, but he was suggesting that McDavid and McKinnon and the guys that he worked with at Four Nations, that was his takeaway, that no hesitation, no double clutching, all of that kind of stuff. So, look, if you're not going to get top end production, I don't know how you think that, the simple math tells me they probably have to win 13 of the remaining 22 games. Maybe 12, but even at that, 12 and 10, do we see the Vancouver Canucks? They have 2 left against Winnipeg. They got 2 left against Vegas. They got 2 left against Dallas. On and on it goes. It's going to be difficult. And yeah, the other teams around them, it's become this giant mud puddle, right? That I think Mike Babcock once used that term to describe sort of the race around the playoff bar. And that's a pretty apt description, that there isn't a team that stands out. Does one of the teams recognize an opportunity this week and make some surprising moves just to think that they can push ahead and become the favorites? Maybe. Let's see where the dust settles after Friday. But yes, I think I'm quite concerned. Playoffs are fun. That's the payoff. Now, this year, if you run straight into Vegas or Winnipeg in the opening round and you're the lower seed, that may not be much fun. But just in terms of playoff hockey, we saw it last year. The return to the postseason was a blast. I think the players had fun. I think we in the media had fun covering it. The city certainly embraced it all. But boy, as we sit here right now with 22 games to go, yeah, I'm having trouble finding that path forward that's going to allow the Canucks to emerge from this group of teams that are all sort of scuffling at the same rate.
Jeff, I've made my thoughts clear on what the Canucks should do with Brock Boeser if they don't think they're going to be able to get him signed. As you look ahead to the trade deadline, like, what do you think this team is going to do with Brock Boeser ultimately?
I do think that they're going to move him. You guys talked about it off the top, this idea of keeping him as a rental, their own rental. You just wish that there were some signs of life from Brock right now, but he had 1 assist in 5 games on the road trip. He got the second assist on the Pia Suter goal in Anaheim after he sent it to Tyler Myers, and Myers did most of the heavy lifting. So that was his offensive contribution in a 5-game road trip, was passing the puck to somebody else that then went around the net and made a play. Hasn't scored since the break. His last goal came against Toronto on February the 8th. So, has it been weighing on him? I would think without a doubt. I think that's just human nature. And so that probably plays into the lack of production. Little surprised, though, to see Rick Tocchet bundle 2 of his problems then and put Pettersson and Boeser together. Have they had some success in the past? Sure, but past just doesn't seem to matter right now with these guys. This is about the here and now, and it's not happening for Boeser, and it's not happening for Pettersson. And even Dakota Joshua on the other side, like, he scored a nice goal, but it was shorthanded. It didn't come at 5-on-5 with that line. So you can't sit here and say that line did a bunch of amazing things in Seattle. And we know that Patterson lost Beniers on the one face-off play that led to a goal there. So, it wasn't a banner night for Elias Pettersson, but you asked me about Brock Boeser. I just sort of feel like this is going to be a missed opportunity if they hold on to him. Again, I just wish that he was a little more productive right here, right now, because I wonder if there are a few teams that are sitting and taking that same stance that, have one foot in on Boeser, but thinking, like, really, like, is this the guy that we want to give up significant assets for as a rental if he's not performing? And it wasn't just the road trip, as you guys pointed out, really, since JT left. Just been spinning circles and hasn't been at all productive. So we'll see where it goes. But my gut, my hunch, and that's all it is that the Canucks will find a taker for Brock Boeser before the deadline.
J-Pat, when you look at this Canucks team right now, is there a path for them to somehow get in even with Patterson scuffling at this level? Like, is there a world where they can figure it out, or is it as simple as if EP40 doesn't figure it out, they just don't have the horses offensively behind him to get the job done?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my sense that 1 goal in 20 games, like, what's an uptick even look like? But in all these close games where a goal might matter, like, you turn to your stars and you think those are the guys that are going to deliver for you in crunch time here. And so I have just this really difficult time, Harm, thinking that if he continues to flounder, and I've seen people say, like, he might not get to 60 points. And then after this road trip, I've seen a revision, he might not get to 50 points. And like, that is just the reality of the situation here. The projections are dropping and the points are not racking up whatsoever. So it's not just the points, though. It's the shots. It's the investment. It's all of that stuff that just makes you wonder how can this team generate enough offensively? If you bump him down the lineup, then now you're asking Philip Hedl and Pia Suter to essentially be the top 2 centers on a team that's going to somehow find its way into the playoffs. That feels like a big ask as well. So, I wish I had a crystal ball to see how this all plays out, because obviously it's fascinating. It takes up so much oxygen in this market, but understandably so when a guy's getting paid to produce and he's just not. And so, I guess the path would be like over the moon goaltending, right? Like, that would be it, that somehow Kevin Lankinen gets back into the groove that he has shown for some short bursts, but over with 22 games to go, what's he going to start? 15 or 16 of those games? Like, he would almost have to be lights out good every time. I don't have the faith that Thatcher Demko is going to get back and be able to get back on form and play enough to be a difference maker here. So maybe you throw all your eggs in that basket if you're still on the side of hope here with the Vancouver Canucks. But even in that, like, you've seen this defensive solidity, and I wrote about it in my column on Sunday that, I think they thought leading into the Four Nations break and even coming out of the break with 1-1 going to the third period in Vegas and 1-1 going to the third in Utah, that all right, they can lean on that they've got this structure now, they've got this defensive identity, that if they can just get a goal here or there, hey, they can grind out a couple of wins. Well, Anaheim and Seattle, Anaheim particularly, not a high scoring team, off to the races. You talked about rush defense. Like, that was embarrassing. And they're going to see the Ducks again on Wednesday. And the Ducks get Trevor Zegras back. So they didn't even have him. And he's been actually pretty good for them since Christmas. Hasn't been a great season for him. But, there's another piece that they're going to have on Wednesday that they didn't have last week when they beat the Canucks. And all of a sudden there are questions about the defensive form with or without Quinn Hughes. So again, it all just stacks up here. Now the Flames are a flawed group, and Utah and St. Louis, it really kind of feels like take your pick. And I still think people look and they say, well, the Canucks roster, in the end, there should still be enough here. I don't know. I mean, just the way this team struggles and didn't score a third period goal on the road trip, like all those games, they had a lead in the second period in all 5 of the games and didn't score a single third period goal. How do you win close games if you're not able to come up? Rick Tocchet talked about it a lot yesterday. Moments. He kept waiting in moments, and unfortunately, most of the moments have gone the other way. The Connor Garland overtime goal, I guess, was a moment for the Canucks in LA, but otherwise on the road trip, almost all the moments went against the Canucks as opposed to working in their favor.
Jeff, last one from me. There's one back-to-back coming up, March 12th. We don't know if Demko's going to be back. We have to assume he's not going to be at this point, the fact that he wasn't on the ice yesterday. Assuming he isn't back, I'm of the opinion that Archer Shilovs can't start another game for this team. I think you got to give Nikita Tolopilo, who's posted similar results in the AHL. You got to give him a shot. You got to get Tolopilo in there for a game.
Feels like a big ask, Dave. This guy's never played in the National Hockey League. There are some that wonder about, at his size, does he have the quickness to perform at the NHL level, and is that why they haven't given him a look at this stage? I hear you in the reservations on Silovs, and obviously the glove hand wasn't anywhere close to good enough the other night in Anaheim. That would be high stakes. It would be a roll of the dice. I'm not saying that it can't or won't happen, but obviously Lankinen can't play them all. And it's funny the way the schedule works. Their next back-to-back is in Calgary. That might be their biggest game, their biggest single game remaining on the schedule, on March the 12th in Calgary, right? We talk about 4-pointers. So what do you do? If Demko's not ready, then do you throw... I know you don't like Silovs, but does somebody play against Montreal on the Tuesday night and keep Lankinen fresh and ready for the Calgary game on the back half of the back-to-back? Then a week later, there are back-to-backs. Not even a week later. Oh, look who's on the second half of the back. It's Utah on the second half. So their next 2 back-to-backs, the second half of each of those sets is against these teams that they're battling with. There's some significant meat on the bone in terms of those games. They are going to have some goaltending decisions to make, and the way that they set up their goaltending. So a bunch of days off here. Lankinen certainly can play on Wednesday night, and then Friday, and then Sunday. I think he can get you through those games. But early next week, and we'll have a better sense, I guess, of where Demko is in all of this. But, by this time next week, yeah, I think goaltending is going to be fascinating, and the way that it rolls out and the decisions that they are going to have to make. But feels like Tolopilo at this stage, to me, would be a long shot. It's kind of the devil you know and the devil you don't. And I'm not sure that they'd be prepared to roll the dice with an unproven guy in games that they figure still have hefty playoff significance. So you may not like it, Dave, but I'm not sure that you've seen the last of Artur Silovs in the National Hockey League this season.
Fair enough. Jeff, thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate it. We will see you on all throughout deadline week, I'm sure.
All right, guys. Thanks.
There he is, Jeff Patterson, the host of Rink Wide Vancouver and contributor to CanucksArmy.com. Jeff wrote a really good column as well. He kind of talked about it there, but I want to make sure everybody goes and reads it. CanucksArmy.com, Patterson's point, can't miss it. Talked about being honest about where this team's core is, and then we also talked about new concerns arising after the Canucks and Ducks, the Canucks lost to the Ducks and Kraken. That was Patterson's point, and then I got them confused. He had a column as well where he wrote about being honest with the core. Okay, good stuff from Jeff. I want to talk about it being a seller's market and the NHL harm, we saw a trio of trades that I want to talk about. We'll lay each one out, and then we'll just kind of go over them all at the end. But Ryan Lindgren is going to be one that we really talk about. I think that one kind of caught everybody off guard a little bit. Ryan Lindgren goes for Calvin DeHaan, Juuso Parssinen, and a conditional 2nd and 4th round pick in the 2025 NHL draft. Hank Kempf from the Rangers going back the other way to Colorado there as well. But Colorado getting Ryan Lindgren is the big thing there. 2nd and a 4th round pick. Minnesota Wild get Gustav Nyquist from the Predators. We were talking about Nyquist as like, oh, if you trade Boeser, just go get Gustav Nyquist. That's not going to cost more than a 4th, maybe a 5th. He goes for a 2nd round pick. Gustav Nyquist does. So the Nashville Predators get a 2nd round pick for Gus Nyquist. Minnesota picks up Gus Nyquist, gives up a 2nd round pick. And finally, the Florida Panthers acquire Seth Jones and a 4th round pick in the 2026 draft from the Blackhawks for goaltender Spencer Knight and a 1st round pick in 2026. I like that trade for both teams, I think. I think it's a fine bet for Florida, especially that every defenseman they get turns into gold somehow. I think it's a fine bet for Florida. Really like it for Chicago, getting a young goaltender in Spencer Knight, who I think is going to be really good, and a 1st round pick as well. I think it's a fine trade for both teams.
Yeah, it's a win-win, right? That was my immediate reaction, especially for the Panther situation. Excuse me. Their bottom 4 defense has been a liability at times this year since they lost Brendan Montour and Oliver Ekman-Larsson from last year's Cup team. Jones is going to come in there, and instead of being asked to be the number 1 defenseman on a brutal team, he just needs to be the number 3 behind Forsling and Ekblad on a team that controls play really well. That, as you alluded to, every defenseman they touch seemingly turns into goal. And the key part too is Seth Jones at a $7 million cap hit in a rising cap climate. That's a totally reasonable contract. So this was one of those trades that I really like for both sides. Nyquist, I'd say, was the biggest surprise for me as far as an overpayment. The Lindgren, yeah, that was expensive too, but Lindgren at least has a track record, despite how heavily he struggled this year, of being an effective top 4, like playoff style defenseman with his shot blocking, with his penalty killing, with his hard nosed sort of gritty playing style. And the Avs are acquiring him to slot in to their 3rd pair, which, I mean, Luke Shen went for a 3rd round pick. So to get a 2nd for Lindgren, it's a better return than expected, but it's not this shocking overpayment to me. That's how I'd characterize both the Nyquist and Lindgren trades. Is more expensive than I figured for sure, but it's not like my jaw dropped hearing either of those prices.
Does it make you think that the Canucks will be able to get something pretty good for Brock Boeser? I think last week you were talking about, okay, it's going to be a 1st round pick, but what else is it? And I think what you and I talked about was probably like a C prospect. This at least makes you think you get a B prospect, right?
Maybe, but sometimes the deadline is wonky. Where last year Tyler Toffoli, who was having a really similar season to Brock in New Jersey, when he got moved to Winnipeg, he only fetched a 2nd and a 3rd.
Mm-hmm.
And people will say, well, Toffoli was older. It doesn't matter when you're a rental. Toffoli was having a better season last year than Boeser is right now.
Also having a better year this year than Boeser is right now.
Yeah, so the point I'm trying to make is, yes, you would think because it's a seller's market that you should be able to get a good return for Boeser. But I don't want fans to think it's a slam dunk guaranteed that you're going to get this massive haul for Brock, because sometimes the market for scoring wingers can be wonky. It can be weird. It can be unpredictable, especially the closer that you get to the deadline. So while, yeah, I lean towards thinking Brock should get a 1st round pick back in a trade, I'm also being careful not to get ahead of myself, knowing that some of these deadline dynamics can be wonky and unpredictable.
Okay, I want to get this super chat in. This is a super chat, which means it is a donation to the BC Mental Health Foundation. It's not much more than that. I'll read it, but our super chats, like I said, our super chat charity partner this season is the BC Mental Health Foundation. You want to make sure your question or comment gets in the show. Hit us with a super chat. Proceeds from our super chat all go to the BC Mental Health Foundation, changing the face of mental health and addiction by supporting breakthroughs in care, public understanding, research, and knowledge exchange. This was from Kevin Smeltzer Music. He said, EP40 for Connor McDavid. Who says no? Thank you for the donation. Don't know if there's much discussion point there, even though I do like, and I'm a firm believer of, you can make a trade work with any two players. You just need to add around it. Don't know if that applies with these two players. Don't think you can add enough to make that work out.
Yeah, there's really nothing to add.
Your thoughts, Arm? Okay. Yes.
Maybe if it's the defenseman version of Elias Pettersson.
This is a good comment from Claire. She said, "Oh, a Canucks stream sponsored by a mental health service. Quite fitting." Yeah, absolutely. That's the way we look at it too. BC Mental Health Foundation. Thanks to our friends over there. All of our super chat donations go to them. Okay. My hot take about Brock Boeser is that the Chicago Blackhawks need to trade for him.
Excuse me?
Trade for Brock Boeser. You're the Chicago Blackhawks. You suck. You're in the gutter. You have this generational talent that's trying to play with Pat Maroon. Trade for Brock Boeser. Bedard would be so happy. You have more money than any other team. Overpay the crap out of Brock Boeser. Keep him in Chicago. Done. Connor Bedard's got a shotgun mate. And Brock Boeser could score 40 goals playing next to Connor Bedard.
I don't know. I'd have to think about the fit between Bedard and Boeser, because I would still be asking a lot out of Bedard as an individual driver. We know that Boeser, like put it this way, Bedard, when he's in his peak, like truly in his prime, yeah, he'll be able to be the type of centerman that can do it all, regardless of how tough his matchups are, and can do all the heavy lifting on a line. Boeser, we know, yeah, like he would unquestionably be an upgrade on whatever the Hawks are icing right now with Bedard. But I don't think Brock is, like, I don't look at him as a perfect fit because of how slow he is and how reliant he is on others to get him the puck. So to make that work, especially because Bedard, yeah, he was a really talented playmaker in junior, and he has a lot of upside, both as a shooter and as an elite playmaker. But ultimately, at this stage in his career, he is still primarily a shot first player. So I don't know about that fit. I don't like that idea if I'm Chicago.
Well, there goes that idea. I don't know. I'd like to see it for the reason of Connor Bedard, Canucks fan, grew up watching Brock Boeser. Now he gets to play with him, and he's still decent. But that being said, the thing that I keep coming back to when I throw this take around in my head is Brock Boeser is probably just going to hit free agency, and then Chicago could take a serious run at him if they really, really wanted to.
Yeah, that's what I put in there. Why would they rent him for the last 20 games of the season?
Strong. You got to finish this year strong. You got to have a winning culture. You can't tank down the final stretch of the season. That'd be like that's like the Canucks' old signature move. Is like, well, we need to get ready for next year, so we did this.
They were even the Jim at Benning era Canucks weren't that desperate.
They weren't buyers. They just happened to win down the stretch usually. Yeah. Okay, let's get to anyone else.
There also is another super chat, by the way.
Thank you, Jacob. This one from James Hansen. It is for $6.99. He said, how does Pettersson look in practice? Serious question. Does he rip pucks there? Does he skate hard? Is there a visible difference between practices and game day? Harmon, you go to more practices than I do, but I'm going to say no, there's no difference. There's no real difference in practice. I know everybody got excited about that one clip that Sweden tweeted out of him at Sweden practice. Everything looks faster when everybody else is standing still. I don't see a noticeable difference in Pettersson at practice than games.
Yeah, also practice isn't really the environment to be judging players' ability. He was out super late on the ice well after practice had ended yesterday, which is nice to see. He's at least working on his craft. But yeah, there's, put it this way, there isn't wow, he looks amazing in practice, why isn't this translating to the games type of thing? And it's also not even meant to be, it's not as if I look at PD's practices and go, oh, I'm expecting a lot more. It's practice. A lot of these are just kind of like drills. A lot of it is refining systems. It's not like they're doing 5-on-5 scrimmages, right?
Yeah, it's hard to judge, and when I do judge, he looks the same. He looks the same. Okay, let's keep going here. Let's get to anyone else. Oh, there's another. Hold on. I shouldn't sound disappointed. I'm happy about it. This is great. Web.3 said, and this is super chat. He said, PD misses shots like mad pregame every game. I've noticed this. You go watch how many players miss the net, and it's always the old joke. In 2021, I remember that season when it was the COVID shortened season, and things weren't going well for the Canucks. I would watch them warm up, and it was an empty building. So there would be like music playing, but it would be an empty building, and just like the number one sound you heard was just pucks hitting the glass. And it was so loud because it was an empty rink. And I just remember always being like, holy smokes, like you're warming up, just hit the net. Like I know you're trying to pick your corners, hit the net to warm up and then start trying to pick your corners. Like, what are you doing? You're just missing repeatedly. Anyways, not just Pettersson, but Web.3 says he sees Pettersson missing them like mad pregame every game. All right. Thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it. All right. Let's get to anyone else, which is brought to you by Greta. A great spot for all games, home and away. The home of our electric watch parties. Greta is a great spot to be, and we hope to see you there all season long. But even if we're not there, you certainly should be. Just minutes from the arena, come by before and after the game or whatever event you're downtown for, with arcade games, weekly drink specials, and the recently updated street food menu. Greta Bar YVR is the place to be. 50 West Cordova Street is the address. Let the games begin. Can't miss it. You drive by, you notice the Canucks Army logo on the window there, and you know that you're at Greta, and that's where you want to be. Okay. I had a few things. Obviously, we're going to talk about Brock Boeser. We actually have a lot in the chat, so let's start in the chat. Conversation started with one that I'm going to be pretty biased toward, but he said, in hindsight, who is more important to the Canucks' success last year, Mike Yeo or Ian Clark? I'm going to say Ian Clark, of course, but like, part of me is like, okay, let's get some more coaches on that bench, maybe. Maybe that might help. Just add another voice in there. Have we tried it yet? What would happen? What happens if we add another voice onto that bench? Who do you say?
I don't think the results this season would be that much different if either one was still here. To be totally honest with you,
I think Sheloves has a better year if Clark's here. We'll say that.
Maybe, but that helps. Maybe you got an extra few points in the standings, but also it's not a guarantee, right? We know Ian Clark is an exceptionally talented goalie coach, but goalies are also random. What's happened to Sheloves this season isn't this like massive mystery of how did he go from looking so promising to barely looking NHL caliber this year. It was such a small sample size of him succeeding in the playoffs. He's never really been elite at any previous level before arriving to the NHL. It's not a huge shock. We see tons of stories like this with goaltenders. So I'll be honest, I don't think either one has a huge impact on this season's results.
And yeah, Harm, to your point there, like Sheloves' playoff numbers last year weren't even that great. He had a sub 900 in the playoffs. And I think people remember that stretch, especially in the Nashville series, with him being really good. And we've seen him do that before, going back to the World Championships a couple of years ago. And you're right, goalies are kind of funny sometimes, right? Especially young goalies with some upside like Sheloves. Sometimes you can look at a stretch of maybe 2 weeks and say, wow, he looks legit, when in fact there's still a lot of things that need to be worked on to do that consistently.
Clark gets the most out of him. MVP at the World Championship. We're putting disrespect on okay. Archer Shelov's name. A little too much disrespect, if you ask me.
All right. Says the guy who like
called on
15
Nikita
minutes
Tolopilo.
ago was like, they gotta start Nikita Tolopilo.
They do.
Sheloves can't see the NHL ice again this season. Talking about disrespect.
I'm just saying, if Clark were here, let's not go down this road.
Also says the guy who had so much praise for Marco Terranius.
Yeah, I like Marco Terranius a lot. I still really like Marco Terranius. I just think that there's value in Ian Clark and Marco Terranius working together. Let's not act like Marco Terranius just fell out of the sky and came here. Marco Terranius and Ian Clark worked together. I would like to see.
Or maybe Sheloves just wasn't ever that good.
Okay, that's fair. And it is also worth mentioning that Marco Terranius has probably gotten the best out of Kevin Lankinen that we could have expected, right?
Yeah.
I like Ian Clark. All right, let's keep going here. Okay. Yeah, so Ricochet was asking, who do you think they can get in trades that's actually going to help salvage a playoff spot this season? I don't have names here, but again, he goes on to talk about how like Hughes is hurt, Demko's hurt, EP40's butt hurt, which is a good one. But like you look at this team and at its core, you need Quinn Hughes playing at his best. You could use Thatcher Demko certainly, and of course you could use Patterson playing as a first line center. Just to deviate a little bit, and I do want to talk about Boeser, but I wrote about Boeser today and the idea of keeping him as their own rental, and I talked about how like this 3 points in 10 games and a -8 isn't all on Brock. He's playing with third line centers, and I saw people talking about this idea of, oh well, a perfect litmus test is going to be Brock going to a new team that trades for him, and if he starts scoring, then it's all Rick Tocchet's fault. It's like, no. Unless Brock Boeser is playing with that team's third line center, like then it's not the same as what he's doing in Vancouver right now, because Vancouver has nothing but third line centers right now. There's no one for Brock to play with that's going to help him get those similar results. We know he's not a play driver. We know he's best as a passenger and with someone that can help drive the offense. We know he's not doing that on his own. And right now the Canucks don't have anybody that's going to do that.
Well, and if anything, that only strengthens the case for
yes,
you can trade Brock, and you're not, and that doesn't mean that you're waving the white flag on making the playoffs this year.
Yeah,
because the way this current roster is set up, I don't know that they have the right centerman to unlock 30-goal pace type production from Boeser down the stretch.
And the thing is, you need those assets to turn this team around. If we can all recognize that they need centers, you need assets. And a way to get those assets is by trading Brock Boeser. You're going to need to figure this out. If you're not going to extend Brock Boeser, you need to make the trade. And I don't want to hear this, oh, they're going to keep him as their own rental and they're going to work really hard on it down the stretch. It's not that hard to figure out a contract for Brock Boeser. If you actually want to sign him, it's not that hard. You know what he's asking for. If you wanted to get it done, they would have got it done by now. And ultimately, like, you're going to lose leverage if you go down that route of saying, yeah, we're not going to trade him. We're going to keep him as our rental, but we're going to really try to sign him. Like, you lose any leverage that you had. You lose that by announcing that publicly, because of course they'd like to avoid a scenario where they keep him as their own rental and then they lose him in free agency. Of course they'd like to avoid that. And certainly if they're going to miss the playoffs anyway, which like I outlined today in my article, is certainly a possibility if you keep Brock Boeser, certainly they would like to not do that. So of course they might look at signing Brock Boeser again, but you know what it's going to cost. So I don't really know what the holdup is, to be honest. If you want to sign him, that's one thing. But if you're not going to, and you're making that decision of, okay, we're not going to pay this, we know what Brock Boeser is going to get on the open market. He knows what he's going to get on the open market. If you're not going to come anywhere close to that, then trade him. Don't do this thing where you go down the stretch and say, oh, we're going to try to work on it even more. You know what it's going to cost. They know what it's going to cost right now.
I also wonder if they go down that road, and this is a big if, right? I don't mean to be talking about a scenario that we're not even certain is going to unfold, but if it does proceed that way, where they keep him as their own rental, I wonder if that becomes part of the messaging, whether it's directly by management or through leak through insiders, where you get that rhetoric of, we weren't able to get an extension done by the deadline, but we're hopeful that we're going to keep trying and keep chipping away. And the intention is to try and get him signed before the July 1st free agent market, in an attempt to calm the fan base to a certain extent, and alleviate their concerns. But like you said, you should know at this point, this isn't a case of like Carolina and Mikko Rantanen. It's like the player doesn't know if he wants to sign there. And so, of course, a team in Carolina's shoes, okay, that makes sense where they potentially hold the player, wait until closer to summer when the player has more of a is more familiar with the environment in Carolina and can make a decision on whether he wants to stay or not. We know Brock Boeser wants to stay here. The Canucks at this point will know what numbers it's going to take to get an extension done. I'm not going to buy, if they keep him as their own rental, we're just going to keep working away at this. Like, to me, if you're keeping him beyond the deadline, you're taking a big risk, especially because, again, the closer you get to July 1, when you're trying to negotiate this extension in the offseason, from the player's perspective, it's like, well, at this point, why not just wait until free agency? I've got the leverage here, especially because of the optics of the organization at that point potentially not wanting to have that nightmare scenario of like missing the playoffs even and not having gotten anything back for Brock.
If Friday passes and Brock Boeser's still a Canuck, like that has to be a question for Alvin. It's like, do you not think this is a little bit reckless? Like, what's the holdup? Why isn't Brock signed? Why are we going down this road? Let's put it this way, Harm. The leverage isn't going to change at all. Brock could not score another goal for the rest of this year, and that's dramatic, of course, but there's no world here where the Canucks benefit from this in the sense of like they go past the trade deadline and Brock says, "Okay, you know what? Actually, I'll sign for less than I was originally asking for. Sure, no problem. That deal you offered me, I'll take that. No worries." Like, there's no world where that happens.
Yeah, fully agree.
We're going to have Frank Saravelli on the show tomorrow. We're going to talk to him more about this as well because Frank reported that there is going to be one more deal. Frank still believes that too, that there's going to be one more deal coming Brock Boeser's way from the Canucks. So we'll see when that happens this week, but the trade deadline is on Friday. I don't think I have any more to say on Brock. I wrote about it. I said a lot of stuff on Friday as well. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't think this is a situation the Canucks want to be in. I think they should trade Brock Boeser if they don't want to sign him, which is fine. Like, I'm not even going to sit here and say they're so silly for not wanting to sign him. I don't think it's a bad idea I don't think it's a bad idea to walk from Brock Boeser, but I think it's a bad idea to let that go to the offseason. And it's like you said, like he's not helping them get to the playoffs right now with the way he's playing without JT Miller. And if they're going to have to go get a center, and a way to do that is by moving on from Brock Boeser. So anyways, a lot of jumbled thoughts today, but just fired up today.
Yeah, let's move on to Brock. I think we've talked about that a lot over the last few days.
Okay. Let's go here. Let's see. Yeah, Clayton Murray. I had this thought recently. This is a really good comment. Clayton Murray said, "Do you still think Hughes has a chance to win the Norris?" Now, he'll obviously finish as a finalist, but earlier, like 4 weeks ago or whatever, right? Before he went down with this injury, we were talking about Quinn Hughes in the sense of, okay, like, yeah, he's obviously going to win the Norris. And I think even around the league, people knew he's going to win the Norris, and then it's going to be Zach Werenski, and then it's going to be Cale Makar, or, Makar or Werenski, whatever. But Hughes was pretty clearly number one. Has this changed at all in your mind?
Absolutely it has. Especially because for Quinn, the concern too is even the remaining games down the stretch, first of all, he's still hurt. And Rick Tocchet said day-to-day at practice yesterday, but how many times does day-to-day turn into longer than that? Secondly, whenever he does return, there's a re-injury risk. Quinn was back for 3 games and then got hurt again. Third, the version of Quinn that we saw playing through injury was nowhere near Norris caliber. And again, not a knock on him at all, but he's playing so banged up that it detrimentally impacts his performance. I think the most likely scenario, through no fault of Quinn's, is that Werenski and Makar are going to gain a decisive edge on him in this Norris race, and that he's kind of going to be left as the third guy, still a finalist. But I think the games missed, and again, just being uncertain of what version you're going to get of Quinn down the stretch matters, especially in the case of Werenski. If Werenski drags the Blue Jackets into the playoffs, man, at that point, we're not even talking Norris for Werenski. We're talking about he's somewhere on my heart ballot. Probably not in the top 3, but he's definitely getting 4th or 5th place votes. And Columbus doesn't look like it's going to fade from the playoff race at this standpoint. They're only getting stronger. So at this point, I'd say Werenski is the favorite in my mind.
And I mean, Werenski is the reason for that. That's why he's going to land on Hart ballots. The Jacket season to this point is because of Zach Werenski. He's had such a great impact on them all season long. When it comes to this race, it is still worth mentioning. Hughes still leads all defensemen in points per game. He's still got a higher rate than Makar, still got a higher rate than Werenski, but ultimately there is going to be a point where games matter. And I mean, I think even in past years, that's hurt Kel Makar as well in this race where it's like, okay, but he missed time, so it's going to this player. Availability matters too, right? And especially like, let's probably forget the Quinn for Hart stuff. That was fun for a bit, but you need to play more games than what we've seen from Quinn Hughes to be in that conversation. Like seriously in that conversation of like, okay, you're going to get top 5 votes. I'm sure he'll get a couple 5th place votes from some people, but actually finishing top 5 in voting, that's just not going to happen for Quinn at this juncture, which is a shame because it was a really, really good season. It still is a really good season for Quinn Hughes, but yeah, it sucks to see him kind of fall out of the Norris race a little bit here.
Yeah, he deserved it. I mean, he put this Canucks team on his back, and I don't mean to write him off, right? There's still a scenario where he comes back whenever it is and lights it up down the stretch, and it's close enough to where he may still get first place Norris votes, but I just worry about the physical health at this point. He looked restricted doing it when he was back. He's gotten hurt again. He's out of lineup right now. I just don't have a lot of confidence that over the next 20 games or however many are remaining that he's going to be able to keep pace with Werenski and Makar.
Okay, this one from Crazy123. Does management deserve more flack for bungling the center depth of the Canucks, who was once seen as among the best in years past?
I don't think that directly is something that management deserves a ton of flack for, because Horvat, you basically exchange him for Hronek indirectly, which this team needed Hronek. They needed the back end help. So he's gone. And then it's JT and Pettersson. I mean, I know JT's having an incredible run with the Rangers right now, but I just don't believe that he was going to be that version of himself here in Vancouver. To me, he looked like a player that was checked out. I've covered JT since his first day in Vancouver. I've talked to him countless times. I've been in the locker room a lot. And JT is one of those players that is always in the locker room when the media is there, regardless of whether somebody's talking to him or not. And this year was so odd to me where he's never been as down and in as grumpy of a mood and just like not even chirping guys in the locker room and having that fun banter. There was something so clearly off with JT right from the start of the season. And you look at the change in circumstances. He went to New York to play with his childhood best friend, Vincent Trocheck. Of course he's jacked up. And to me, again, he just looked like a player that needed a fresh start. We saw it first game back for JT. I had never seen him that emotionally invested and engaged, just like a missile as the first man in on the forecheck. I hadn't seen that version of JT at all this season. And he turned it on like a light switch, which just tells me that a lot of that was him not being fully invested in still being in Vancouver and probably reaching a point where he wanted a fresh start, which it made sense for both sides to kind of move on there. And the Pettersson thing, I've seen some people criticize management for signing him to that extension. I'm not going to sit here and criticize management for signing him to that extension. It's possible that that the extension becomes one of the worst contracts in the league if he continues on this trajectory. But who was honestly saying don't re-sign Elias Pettersson to a long-term deal?
Exactly.
At that point, he was coming off 102 points the previous season. He was on pace for 107 points headed into the All-Star break. This wasn't just, this is a 90-point centerman. You had a large sample size of, he's playing like a 100-plus point centerman.
You know who the only person who actually thought of the idea of trading Elias Pettersson was? Jim Rutherford.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, like, boy, they were...
Don't you remember how shocked we all were
when
that news came out that they went to him and were like, hey, we're going to have to trade you to Carolina if you don't sign here. Like, we need to know what's going on. We need to know where your head's at. And then a deal got done. Like, yeah, you're right. You're right. Hindsight is absolutely 2020 when it comes to the situation. And the other thing I'll say is like, if you're gonna criticize them for maybe robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? Where okay, they address the defense by trading Horvat, by trading Miller, they get Marcus Patterson, they get Philip Hronik. You can only do so much, right? Like you can only do so much to restructure your back end. And also, let's be clear, like they didn't choose for Elias Pettersson to play as poorly as he is right now. And if Patterson was himself, if Patterson was the player they thought they were getting when they signed this contract, I don't think we're talking nearly as much about the Canucks' lack of center depth. But the reality of it is Filipino is this team's number one center. So of course we're talking about it. Of course we're talking about it.
I think it's not so much the center depth and how they handle that, because I think it's been sort of, you can reasonably draw out their thought process at the time,
Yeah,
and justify their real-time decisions. I think if anything, like a question that we're going to get an answer to as we see how this management group approaches the next season and the year after, is when they first took over, there was debate, right? Where a lot of us were saying that this team should, at that point, be trying to retool, right? When the discussion wasn't even, oh, should they pick Bo? Should they pick JT? It was, they should trade both of them. They should, instead of trying to salvage that season by trying to hire Rick Tocchet, they should just play the year out, sell aggressively, tank for that season alone. And then it's not that you're trying to tank perpetually into the future, but then you're trying to do like a quick reload.
Mm-hmm.
And if anything, like I think this management group doubling down on this core, we'll see how that ages, right? Because last year it looked phenomenal, and I was coming on this podcast and saying, boy, I was wrong, because I originally thought you don't double down on this core. I don't think this core is it. Management was vindicated for taking that path of, we're going to try and fix it now. And we believe in this group. We're going to extend JT. But then this year it's coming apart, and not just for honest results reasons, for locker room dysfunction, for lack of professionalism. And if this sort of continues, then I think we'll look back on that point when management first took over and say, even though they got that one great year out of the group last season, that ultimately that's not enough of a reward for doubling down on this core. And had they approached it differently, this team might have had a shot at actually building a durable contender during the timeline of this remaining Hughes contract. So we'll see. I think the jury is still out on whether their original blueprint, which again we all thought was right last year, we'll see how that ages, and perhaps we'll look back on that as a fatal mistake.
And seriously, like, the thing that we haven't really talked about enough, I don't think, is that at this juncture, the path has to be, do your little retool or whatever you need to do, like turn this team around quickly, do your best to continue to do what you've done, where you ship out pieces like Boeser, like Pettersson, and bring in pieces that you believe in, like they've done with Marcus Patterson, like they've done with Drew O'Connor, obviously Philip Hronik, you can put in that conversation as well. Like, that's the path here. Keep doing that until you lose Quinn Hughes. And then once you, if you lose Quinn Hughes, because that's the whole reason you're doing this, right, is to try to keep Quinn Hughes here. So make this team competitive again. That's absolutely what this management group needs to be doing right now. But then if you lose Quinn Hughes in free agency, then okay, that's your chance to restart. You have to just restart at that point.
Well, the thing too is what they're doing right now, where they're trying to retool this core on the fly, this transition phase. Like, that's what arguably they should have been doing originally in 2022. Like, the issue for them right now is I don't think anybody is saying, oh, they shouldn't be retooling this core. That, oh, how could you trade JT and how could you consider moving Brock? Because we know this core, just as currently constructed, isn't it. The problem is, do you have enough of a runway to become a contender during the 2 seasons that Quinn has left after this season? It's such a narrow window to try and hit. Whereas if you had done this originally when they took over and when Benning was fired, like late 2022, early 2023, whenever it was, like, they actually had a long runway to execute their vision. Whereas now it's okay, you're trying to sell and sell some assets, but now you got to go out and find potentially number one centerman. And that's even before, like even outside of the Elias Pettersson conversation is you need another high and top six centerman, and you got like some of these high leverage needs. We'll see. Again, I'm not saying that definitively they were wrong, because there's still a path where they can get creative, and if they make the right moves, they can still salvage things. But that is going to become an open question depending on the results we see over the next season or two.
Okay. Let's get to our Bet365 bet of the day, which is brought to you by Bet365. Don't remember what I bet on Friday. Jacob has the tracker open. He'll let us know. Okay, sorry. I need to read this. This comment is just... Okay. This is from Nuckhead. Okay, I didn't know it was from Nuckhead. I like Nuckhead. But this is off. I'm sorry. There's no chance Quinn Hughes leaves the team in a few years. You can tell he's not the type to give up like that. He's the captain of the team and takes pride in that. He'll be here through thick and thin. I get it. I understand that you want to believe that. I totally get it. But like Matthew Tkachuk, the year before he left, was talking about how committed he is to Calgary and stuff. Quinn Hughes hasn't been asked about this. We should also mention that. Quinn Hughes has never been asked about this. And I'm sure if he were right now, he would give an answer just like that. But you also have to realize that this is a chance for him to maybe go play with his brothers, be on a winning team, and that's just with the Devils. Aside from the fact that he probably wants to win at the end of the day. And if the Canucks aren't going to give him a chance to win, he's probably not going to want to stick around for that. Or if they decide, yeah, we've got to rebuild, he's probably not going to want to stick around for that. But on the other side of that, this idea of the perpetual retool is also something he probably doesn't want to stick around for. So let's not speak in absolutes about guys not wanting to leave. There's definitely a chance that Quinn wants to leave. I'm not saying it's happening, but this idea that there's no chance, just stop. It's not accurate. Okay, so let's just end that. Also, didn't mean to just rip Nuckhead like that. I didn't realize it was Nuckhead. But anyways, let's move on here. Let's get to our Bet365 bet of the day, brought to you by Bet365. Where did we go here? NHL slate. Do you like the Sharks over the Maple Leafs?
I don't know. You're the vibes guy. You tell me.
Plus 290 odds. You can get the
Sharks. Check on Celebrini.
Oh.
He might be. I think he was banged up. I don't know if it doesn't sound too serious, but just check if he's still playing. Okay. Because you don't want to bet on the Sharks without Macklin Celebrini.
I think he's playing. He's on the daily faceoff lines.
Okay, that's good.
Celebrini is expected to play Monday in Toronto. Yeah, he was a game time decision. He's expected to play.
Okay, there you go.
We're riding it. I
wanted you to double check.
I appreciate it. Riding it. Sharks money line plus 290. We're doing it. Sharks to take down the Toronto Maple Leafs at plus 290 odds. Sharks money line. That's our bet of the day. Brought to you by Bet365, proud partner Canucks Conversation. Open account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Be sure to use code NATION when you sign up for an account. It must be 90 plus to play. If you choose to play, please play responsibly. All right, we'll wrap it up there. For my co-host Harmon Dial and our technical producer Jacob Boeser, we'll be joined tomorrow by Daily Faceoffs Frank Saravalli as we continue to preview the trade deadline. Close it out there. Thanks for watching Canucks Conversation. Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.